Official welcome to everybody to the second in our entrepreneur webinar series. I would love to tell you that an hour is going to be enough, but with this crew, I suspect it won't. So we may be back. We're happy to have you all with us, and take notes if you want, but if you don't want to, we're going to send out some slides, resources from everybody, and the recording of the session if you'd like to share it. So again, thank you for being with us. We wanted to, you can put up the slide now that talks about why we're here today. We wanted to talk today about how to raise capital and also how to raise resources internally if you're in a bigger corporation, so page 2, and very often are facing the challenge of winning resources, winning support, doing the same thing intrapreneurial that entrepreneurs do to raise funds and get interest in their businesses. We'll talk about that, how to prepare for the challenges and avoid what Deb likes to call potholes, what I call obstacles. We'll leave plenty of time for Q&A. And as I said, we will send the slides out afterwards, so you can just sit back, relax, eat your lunch if you're eating. Any questions, throw them into the chat. We will also have time at the end for that. So the next page is just a reminder about who we are. And this is your esteemed panel for today. I'm going to ask each of the panelists to take a moment and introduce themselves and how come you are a resource for this group that we have today. I have to say that when I called Elaine and when I called Camille and then Vanessa as a result, I felt very fortunate that they A, took my call, and B, said that they would talk with me on this webinar today. One of the things that I love about doing webinars is we can all be wherever we are, and each person will tell you where they are and still share our knowledge. And so I'm very proud to bring them all to you today. And I'm not even going to read this slide. This is who I am. Half of you already know me. I love teaching, and that's what today is about, and learning, because we can all always learn. And I have a couple books if anybody wants to read them. But today we're going to be here promoting Elaine's new book, and she'll talk about that in a minute. Let's go to the next page. Camille, can I ask you to introduce yourself and unmute? Yep.
Sure. Hi, everyone. Great to be here. I'm Camille Burns, and I'm the CEO of the Women Presidents Organization. And what we do is we're a membership organization for women CEOs and presidents of multi-million-dollar companies. So our core business is running peer advisory groups, and we have about 2,000 members in 141 chapters around the world. So really great population of women entrepreneurs. The average revenue of our members is about 13.5 million. So we work with mainly second stage entrepreneurs and sort of the small to mid-sized businesses with some, outliers on both ends. I've been in this space for 21 years, so I'm a big supporter and advocate for women-owned businesses and small and medium-sized businesses in general. I believe firmly in the power of community. That's what we do, but there's so many opportunities with communities out there. And I think that that's something that's really important, is being part of a community, finding like-minded people and peers. I think that's how we all grow, and that's how we all succeed. And yeah, just really happy to be here. And Lisa is one of our members, actually. So that's how we connected.
Thank you. Let's go to our next exciting thought starter, and that is Elaine. Will you tell us about yourself, Elaine?
Sure, Lisa, and thank you everybody for coming in the middle of the day. I'm so happy to have the opportunity to connect with you and the great women on this panel. I'm a journalist. I was a senior editor at Fortune Small Business Magazine for 8 years, and then I went freelance about 15 years ago, hard to believe, and I am a journalist for a lot of different business publications and do ghostwriting mostly for entrepreneurs. And as you see, I'm a book author. I focus a lot of my efforts on smaller businesses before they're at the point of scaling. And the first book was the $1 Million One-Person Business, where I looked at businesses that had no payroll. This book takes them to the step beyond, where they're starting to build small teams, either regular groups of contractors or W-2 employees, and how are they positioning themselves for growth. And Vanessa is one of them in the case study. We're so happy she could be here. So thanks so much.
Thank you, Elaine, for coming. I've been reading articles by Elaine for a long time. And as I said, I just happened to read one in Millie that was very thought-provoking. And I just reached out and said, come join us. And she agreed. So I'm really honored to have both Camille and Elaine here, and Vanessa, you as well. Will you tell us your story?
Yeah, sure. I'm so happy to be here and meet all of you. I'm the co-founder of Nomad Lane. We do bags and accessories to keep professionals organized on the go. My husband and I started the business after traveling to more than 40 countries. And after, and during our travels, we were always like, oh, I wish this bag had this, or I wish I had this accessory. And that's how we came up with the idea. When we were first launching our bag, the investment was quite high for our first production run. And that's where we turned to crowdfunding. We did a lot of research before launching our first campaign, and that all paid off when we ended up raising over $2 million for our travel bag, which is called the Bento bag. We actually recently went back to crowdfunding for our second bag, and we launched our first tote bag on the market. Prior to Nomad Lane, I actually lived in New York City and worked within marketing and advertising for larger companies. So I have the experience working as an entrepreneur in a two-person business and working in larger organizations where you're trying to push specific projects out the door. Yeah, so it's a little bit about myself. I'm so happy to be here and share my experience.
Thank you, Vanessa. And when we talk about raising capital, crowdfunding is obviously a very important way to do that. We'll talk about that, and we'll talk about other ways to do it as well. And along with the recording will be a way to order from Nomad Lane for those of you who are salivating seeing the bag in the picture right here. Let's go to the next introduction, and that's Deb. And I have the pleasure of working with Deb at Luminations. She has mentored many women professionals in startups. And Deb, do you want to just take a quick moment and introduce yourself?
Yeah, I spent the first 20 years doing kind of entrepreneurial work and finding venture funds, working within venture funds. And then the last 12 years or so doing entrepreneurial work, helping other women who were starting their businesses. And I've mentored over 100 women within the professional environment of corporate America as well as startups. So I'm happy to be here and be part of this esteemed panel.
And while we're not speaking just to women, it is even harder to be an entrepreneur as a woman. So thinking about it as a torture test, we'll give some stats and examples and information there. The other thing I think that Deb's going to do is take us through a few pages on intrapreneurship as well as entrepreneurship, and why this learning is so important no matter what job that you have or may wish to have. So let's go to the next page. Just some stats and tips, and we can flip to the next one. Deb, you want to get started with this?
Yeah, sure. This actually just popped up on my LinkedIn a few days ago, and 2,300 people, when asked, what would you do if someone gave you $2 million? 46%, so almost half of them said the number one thing that they would do is start a business, which I thought was really interesting. But then if you go to the next slide, when asked, what is it that, is stopping you? I mean, why don't you try? Keep going to the next slide. People said, of course, the number one reason is lack of money. They also said lack of leadership, knowledge, skill, and drive. But really, 46% according to Inc. 42% of people, according to Inc. magazine, said they don't start companies because of money. So it is the number one reason. So that's why we're here today, to talk about how we can leap into these new ventures and find the pathway and get the funding we need. So if we keep going. So some other interesting things that I found, when I was looking, like, why do people take the leap? And, the pandemic is a perfect example of, a pivot point. So you can look at some of these people that are very successful. Mark Cuban was a bartender till he was 25. Harrison Ford was a carpenter. And J.K. Rowling was a single mom on welfare at the age of 31. So it's never too late. And if you go to the next slide, you'll see, to my point, the timing of when these people started Pandora at the age 35, Ray Kroc started McDonald's at 52, and KFC was started at 65. So it's never too late to take the pivot. And if you have a pathway to get there, that is really what's going to help you understand that you can do it. So if we move to the next slides, I think this is Camille where she takes over.
Nope, this is still
This-
you.
Yeah, this is me. So whether you're entrepreneuring or intrapreneuring, you've got to find funding. So I've done both. Not one is not easier than the other. Women startups in general have the hardest time of finding venture money, but now more than ever, the timing is good. They're still only receiving 2% of venture capital. So obviously we have a ways to go. But if you see the chart on the bottom, you can see that there are more people getting more funds, and funding is a higher value for women. And there are companies like MasterCard who are committed to supporting women entrepreneurs and offering broader inclusion within the support of financial funding for entrepreneurs.
And just to build on that, and why are we talking about entrepreneurship, how to raise capital and get resources within a larger organization? One of the things that Luminations has been increasingly asked to do is to help develop the pitch deck that will be used internally to seek funding and to seek sponsorship and commercialization. Whereas we used to do this more for entrepreneurs who would be going externally for capital, today that same pitch deck plays a role in companies. And so getting the right consumer or customer insight and concept, looking at and developing a financial model, and conveying, selling it to people within the company is more important than ever. So now I think we go to Camille's slides.
Great. And I just want to say, Deb, I love that you're talking about it's never too late, because I think we see this particularly with women, that women tend to start businesses later, although this is changing. It's different than it used to be when I was first in this space. But I think that's a really important thing for women, because often they start businesses because of situations, whether they couldn't move up in a corporation or they needed more flexibility with their time. They needed to be able to own their own schedule. And so I think that's a really good point, because a lot of our most successful women started their businesses later in life. And I think that it's just really important to point that out. A couple things that I wanted to talk about just in terms of statistics is a couple sources of data that we have within the organization. And first of all is looking at a study that we do every year, a business outlook survey with EY. And WPO members, as I said, are all women running multi-million-dollar companies. And the women in the EY Entrepreneurial Winning Women program are the same. They're all running multi-million-dollar companies. So when we look at how they started their businesses, we see that over 70%, 72% started their businesses with personal savings. And then we look at the other women who are part of this. It's bank lines of credit, credit cards, family and friends. And so you see down at the bottom is where there's the venture capital, the angel investors, private equity. And I think this is really important to point out when looking at women-owned firms. And if you go to the next slide, we run a list every year, the 50 fastest women owned and led companies. And we partner with JP Morgan Chase on this list. So these are businesses that are growing really rapidly. Number one on our list from last year, she grew 1700% from 2016 to 2020. So these are businesses that are growing really fast, and they're still getting the majority of their funding from personal savings, family, and friends. So we really see that, even though I'm glad to see, Deb, your statistic that women are receiving more venture capital just in the last year than they have in the past. I think there's just such a huge gap there when we're looking at women-owned businesses. And
Neil,
then
just to ask a question about that. Yes, we raise money from family and friends, but at some point we may have a question, or I'll ask you, how do we do this? Because that's a hard conversation to have. But also everybody should know there's a lot of money out there. And entrepreneurs are often afraid to put the package together to go out and get it. It doesn't have to be family and friends or our own savings. It just is, because that's historically what we've done.
Mm-hmm. And when I look at these numbers, I also see the challenges that this poses for women who may not have access to either family and friends that have this kind of funding or their own personal savings, or the ability to spend their own personal savings on launching a business. And I think this is particularly true for women of color and other women who it's twice as hard for them to get the business off the ground because of the lack of resources from the start. So I think there's some challenges we can look at there. And then if you go to the next slide, just going back to the Business Outlook survey that we did, you can see that 34% of the women were interested in raising capital for the future expansion. But you see also that, again, it's looking at bank lines of credit, government loans and grants, which I think is increasing. And then it goes to private equity, venture capital, et cetera. And one of the things I want to point out with this, because it's obviously wonderful to be able to start a business with your own funds, family and friends, getting lines of credit. But again, when we're talking about bank loans and lines of credit, that's more challenging for women of color. We know that. And it's more challenging for women in general. But also when we're talking about scaling a business, you don't have the same kind of expertise and resources when you get funding from your own funds or family and friends or banks as you do when you have private investors or venture capitalists who have a lot of expertise and really can help you scale that business and grow it much more rapidly.
So this is the normal progression of funding. So just side by side, wanted to look at the entrepreneur versus the intrapreneur and really want to focus on the intrapreneur here. But the point, I think the reason that most people start with self-funding and then go to friends and family and then to business associates is that people want to know you have some skin in the game. So when you get to the tier 2, the angel investors, even the crowdfunding, bank credit, they want to know that you've made some progression and that you have a little bit of some proof points really to show some success and that you believe in it enough to put your own money in. So that's typical. I'm not saying there's no straight line. There's every scenario, there's hundreds of scenarios of ways to get money. But then looking off to the right, in terms of intrapreneurial, there are many firms, many companies who have venture funds, who have these incubators where there's money sitting there, and internally getting a piece of that pie, finding that white space or within your brand, knowing that there's an opportunity within mergers or acquisitions to build your brand, understanding that space, and then going in and creating a business case, knowing that there's a strategic plan that fits within this new venture, the return on investment, and having some research. That's really the pathway internally. And then the second thing is you have a core business with an existing budget, and you use that money to find the market research for these new business opportunities. So the pathway to get there is securing a sponsor that's in your leadership, making sure you have the right research so that you can prove out that there's an ROI, that you can reach some key performance indicators. That's what the KPI is. And then understanding your buyers. So whether it's consumers or whether it's retail buyers, having some input from them, whether it's through simple things like dark posts on social media, or actually meeting with a potential large food, drug, or mass buyer, having a meeting and pitching an idea ahead of time as a partner with that idea. And then finally doing some test markets. So this is, again, there's no straight line. There's lots of different ways, but these are typical ways that when you're in a company, you can look to raise fund and get supporting for resources.
And I'm going to just ask each of you to talk a little bit about your top tips for successful funding or resourcing, and any pitfalls we should really be thinking about. And I already wrote down, Camille, that we talked about financing may not be as accessible for all communities. And that's something we should all be thinking about, both on the how do we help people get financing and how do we help direct financing in the right way. I will start with mine. And really for mine, I focused on preparation, making sure you anticipate any question you could be asked by any party for whom you'll be presenting your idea. And while there are lots of things that are important to me, that's the number one. And the pitfall that goes with that is not being prepared, not anticipating the question and therefore not being able to capitalize on that opportunity, which might be a formal presentation in a boardroom, or it might be a very informal discussion. Remember when we used to go to cocktail parties? And knowing what your elevator pitch is and knowing the answers to the questions someone's going to ask you about your customer, your consumer, your revenue model. How long is it going to take you to break even? And what, if I gave you money, would you do with it? Sources and uses of capital. That's my top pitfall and my top tip. Anybody have anything to build on that? I know a number of you talked about having the right information and assembling the right deck. Vanessa, you had to do it on Indiegogo in a format that was very short and sweet, right?
Yes, exactly. So in crowdfunding, it was a little bit different in the sense that you're not building a deck per se, but you're still telling your story. And in a more visual format. So for us, a big part of crowdfunding was coming up with our video. And this is where we explained who we are, why we're doing this, like why did we create this bag? Why do we need help bringing it to life? And I think really investing in figuring out all those elements helped with the success of the campaign. So people were able to relate to us. They were able to see, okay, this is, they've traveled a lot. That emphasize, our expertise in the category. We also talked a little bit about our experience in the past. So we had some experience with manufacturing. So they were like, okay, they've done this before. I trust that they can get this bag done. I'll back them. I think this is a great idea.
I think one of the things I'm sure Camille will say, and Elaine as well, is the idea is really important, but the people behind the idea are equally important. Vanessa talked about building trust. And I think when people invest, they don't just invest in a thing. They invest in the people who are running the thing. And I know at WPO, we talk a lot about that and having that community of women who are constantly building relationships and trust is important. I don't know, Camille, do you want to add to that at all?
I think that's 100% true. And Vanessa, I love crowdfunding, and just congratulations, because I think it's such an excellent vehicle, particularly for women. If I could take 1 minute, because I want to reference a couple studies that I think are really interesting in terms of women going in and looking for funding. So there's a Harvard business study that came out in 2017. And it's really interesting, and I can share this link after. But basically looking at promotion questions versus prevention questions, and how when they go in, and they did a lot of studies, especially in venture capital, women pitching for venture capital, they found that the people asking the questions, typically white males, tended to ask men more promotion questions, which promoted a promotion response, and prevention questions to women. So a couple examples of this is, one is a promotion question would be, how do you plan to monetize this? And a prevention question is, how long will it take you to break even? Another example is, what major milestones are you targeting for this year versus how predictable are your future flows? So what this does for women is it puts them sort of on the defensive from the beginning and having to prove themselves. And so the study goes further to talk about, if you can, when you're asked those kind of questions, can you turn it around? And can you respond with a promotion answer? And so I think that's something really interesting as women we have to think about, because people are coming in with their biases already. And we have to position ourselves in a way that we look like the experts. And I think, to your point, Lisa, it's trust. And if people are coming in and they already don't believe that you know what you're talking about, or you can do this, I think that when you go on the defensive and when you're put in a position to be proving yourself constantly, it sort of doesn't give the investors the same level of confidence. There's also a 2018 study from Boston Consulting Group that I love. And again, I'll share these links. But it found that women we know receive a lot less funding, and the disparity they found in the study they did averages about more than $1 million that men were receiving in funding than women. But it actually, in this study, they found that women return higher revenue over the course of the 5 years. So women are actually a better bet. yet the investment money is going more to men. And again, they found kind of similar results in that women were defending their knowledge of what they're doing, their technology knowledge, for example, if it's a tech company, where men were coming in and talking about what amazing leaders they are. And women, I think, ask for less and underestimate, or they're more conservative, let's say, with their calculations, whereas men go in with these big, numbers. And so I think it's interesting to think about as women how we respond to these questions. And as you're talking about the preparation for the questions, also thinking about how we can turn questions around or respond in a way to make sure that we're instilling that level of confidence, and we're helping get past the biases that I think already are in the room and already are going to be there when you walk in the door.
Excellent and scary, both at the same time.
Yeah.
Elaine, in your list of tips, you talked a lot about the kind of the financial principles and the importance of clean books and accounting and things that entrepreneurs, and I'm going to tell you even big companies, can be messy. Do you want to talk a little bit about some of those principles?
Sure. I do want to say something about venture capital.
Okay,
Because
please
I
do.
remember when I was at Fortune Small Business Magazine, we did a cover story about, why don't more women break the $1 million ceiling? And my older daughters were 3 years old at that time. They're twins. They just turned 18, and the needle has only moved by 1% for women in that whole time. And so when I think about venture capital, what I think about is a very small percentage of any entrepreneurs get venture capital. But if you look at the numbers, and 98% or 97% of your demographic is consistently rejected by venture capital, you have to ask the question about how sincere are these investors about actually diversifying the companies they base. They talk about it, but some of these people are incredibly smart. They're great at world domination, and yet this problem has barely changed. So I'm a big believer in self-funding and bootstrapping. And what I'm writing about smaller businesses in my book, and books rather, but there are unicorns now. Zoho is an example, that are completely bootstrapped, and it's not the only one. So what I recommend is that people really think creatively about funding and think about doing things like what Vanessa did, which is to lean into the types of funding that are more equitable. I think women actually, statistically, I saw one study that said women do better with crowdfunding. And then when you're at scale, then you can really negotiate with the venture capitalists. But at the stage that most businesses are at, you really don't need that money. I saw some really creative street fighter strategies in the book as to how people got their early funding. And one couple, Colin and Angie Raja, they're into CrossFit and boxing, and their business is called Rim Sports, and they sell boxing gloves and that sort of thing in colors that women would like, not all black. And they bought a bunch of plastic water bottles on eBay. Oh no, actually they didn't buy them on eBay. For $1, and they sold them at scale on eBay for $20 each. And that was how they raised their startup funding. And now their business is several $1 million in revenue. They were a two-person, $2 million business for a long time. So I think it's important to really think about however you can raise the money. If you're hitting a brick wall, you don't have to go through the conventional routes. That said, it is important to be able to prove that you would be responsible if you are going to go even to friends and family, right? They don't want you to waste the money on a business that's not going to grow. So you do need to keep good books and be able to talk clearly about, what are your profits now? What are you selling right now? As Lisa said earlier, and be able to have a business discussion with the people that you know. It's also important, that original article that brought us together, Lisa, in Millie. One thing you don't want to do is go to people that can't afford to lose the money. Because if you're on this call, that means you have probably more tolerance for risk than a lot of people, right? People who are more in the steady paycheck world and not thinking about entrepreneurship. So if you borrow somebody's college fund or something like that, that's a lot of pressure. And not all businesses work out. That's part of the game. I think entrepreneurs are not necessarily the risk takers that we say. I think they're actually risk minimizers, like the way that Vanessa tested the bags on a crowdfunding site, right? If you got no orders, you probably wouldn't have made them. But that said, any business can fail. And so you don't want to take money that people really can't afford to invest in your business. But there is so much money out there, as you said, Lisa. There's a ton if you think very creatively about where to go for it. And then as it builds, you'll have so many more options if you use the money well.
Thank you for saying that. And actually a question came in into the chat while we were talking. I'm going to ask that in a second. And I don't want to forget, Deb, to talk about technology and the importance of intellectual property, because I know that's something that in your past ventures and with other entrepreneurs that has come up a lot. So maybe we'll go to that after. People are asking, how do I get started if I have a technology or I have a product idea? But the question that came up, Vanessa, was actually for you, and it's about crowdfunding and what general guidance can you give? Can anything be crowdfunded, and how do you know? And how'd you pick Indiegogo? By the way, there's lots of other options.
That's a great question. So the first thing we did before we decided on crowdfunding was to just research and see what types of products have done well on various crowdfunding platforms. And we saw that bags had done really well on both Kickstarter and Indiegogo. We were like, okay, this could be something for us. We automatically felt that sense of hope of like, this could be a venue. And then we did a lot of upfront work in the sense of building an email list. So we actually got like a first prototype maybe 6 months before we launched the campaign. We took some very average looking photos and tried to make them look as nice as possible. I remember like photoshopping it onto like the back of someone, like, oh, this person's traveling. And we used that to like build a landing page and gather email addresses. And then I think we ran like a small Facebook campaign driving to that landing page, encouraging people who like to travel. Hey, we have this cool new bag. It does this and this. We focused on, I think it was like 2 or 3 top features. And the main thing we understood was that people wanted a bag that would fit under the seat in front of them. So we focused on, that's our key selling point. And from there, as we gathered email addresses, then we estimated, a percentage of those would back us on the first few days. And that's how we knew that, this campaign had a strong chance of performing well. And that's when we started to invest more in building out the video and creating more content for, images, GIFs. People like to see how the bag is packed. And we actually built out the first version of our page on Kickstarter. And we started reaching out to anyone that I found online who talked about bags. And I actually found someone at Fast Company who had tweeted that she was looking for a new bag to try out for an article. And so instead of just reaching out to her directly, we had a friend tweet back at her and be like, hey, I heard about this cool new bag that's about to launch. Would you like to try it out? And then we followed up with her directly being like, oh, one of our customers told us about how you're looking for this bag. And she actually ended up featuring our bag on Fast Company before we even launched the crowdfunding campaign. And from there, we obviously got a lot more signups. And then Indiegogo reached out to us from there, being like, "Hey, if you come onto Indiegogo, we'll help build your page. We'll help feature you on our homepage and all that stuff." So we're like, "Okay, this sounds like a great deal." There's obviously pros and cons both ways. Kickstarter has a larger audience, but Indiegogo is, I think, better at providing support for entrepreneurs. They'll give you a campaign strategist who can help look through your page and give you suggestions on how to improve it. And then specific industries do better on each of the crowdfunding platforms as well. So definitely something to research before you start.
Can you talk
And-
a little bit about the importance of your first day, your first like 72 hours? Because I think people don't understand that. And also the concept of like, if you build it, they will come. I think those are two of the biggest misperceptions or maybe misunderstandings for people who are doing crowdfunding.
Yeah, for sure. So I think, the first point of your success is really dependent on how well you do on day one of the campaign, because that's what kicks in the algorithm on both Kickstarter, Indiegogo, or other crowdfunding platforms. It shows the algorithm that, oh, people are interested in this campaign, and it automatically pushes you to the homepage of that platform. It shows your campaign to other people who have backed other platforms. They send an email to either Indiegogo or Kickstarter could send an email to existing campaigners from other campaigns rather. So you want to set yourself up for that success on day one of the campaign. So ideally, it's like you reach your goal on day one. And the way we did that was through that email list. So ensuring that we had a strong list of people who we were, who had kind of like essentially said, I'm going to back this on day one. And then another interesting trick that we used at that point was, I think it was like 2 days before the campaign launched, we kept, emailing the audience. And 2 days before, we sent them a calendar invite that says, here is the launch date and time. So that on day one, we knew that these are the people who are going to back our campaign.
Vanessa, I think we may do another series just on people who are interested in crowdfunding, because that's a whole webinar in and of itself.
Yeah.
Couple of thoughts based on Deb's question and some other questions that people sent to me. First of all, if you are not starting an entrepreneurial venture, but you're thinking about how can you be disruptive in a bigger organization, make sure you're on Indiegogo and Kickstarter and all of the platforms, because that's where the ideas are.
Mm-hmm.
And maybe a bigger company could jump on it faster.
Mm-hmm.
And so one of the things that I will say to any intrapreneur is get out there where the entrepreneurs are. You also mentioned a reporter, and a good friend of mine told me there's an email newsletter called Haro, Help a Reporter Out. And that comes out every day with what are reporters at all of the blogs and magazines and newspapers looking for experts on. Why is that important? Well, like Vanessa said, you just have to find one where you can be the expert or be the product. And so as an entrepreneur, really important to spend time. That's free, by the way. I'll put that in the follow-up email too. But secondarily, again, if you are in a larger company looking for disruptive innovation, you know what people are talking about and what they're going to be talking about, because these are the articles that are going to come out in 24 hours and in longer lead time press in 2 months or 3 months, and you can be out ahead of the curve. And I think Deb brings up the interesting point, which is crowdfunding. Being really successful on day one is super important. With other forms of funding or resourcing, not as important. Getting to a point where you have proof of concept that demonstrates the potential for the enterprise might take a little time. In fact, one of you put in your tips, it's going to take more time than you think. This doesn't happen overnight. My business was 20 years old when I was fortunate enough to take it to the next level with MPG. If you would have asked me 20 years ago, would I have still been running Illuminations, I would have said no way. Fortunately, it was fun and exciting and provided a good service, but things take longer than you think. So you have to really be committed to it. And then there was another point that came up that that Vanessa mentioned, and I'm assuming you spent a little money on Facebook, right? There are some ways digitally to build awareness that are spending a little money, not a lot of money. And if you find the right target audience, and on Facebook, you really can, well, maybe less so today than last year, you can generate interest that way. There was a question about how does crowdfunding ownership work? Vanessa, I'm going to ask you to address that in like 30 seconds, and then we'll move on to some of the other topics. But how does crowdfunding ownership work for those of you who haven't invested? And that's another thing. Go put a little money into a great entrepreneur's idea on the crowdfunding platform.
Yeah, sure. So there's two different types of crowdfunding. There's one that's essentially more of like a pre-order, and there's one that's more equity-based. We did the pre-order route. So someone was putting money in order to get a product of ours. So they were kind of like just backing the product or pre-ordering the product. So there was no equity or stock given.
And usually there's a discount associated, right? Because you're pre-ordering, so they're taking some risk. So you discount the bag by a certain amount, knowing that they're going to have to wait 6 months or 9 months to get delivery. So that's the incentive for them to take the risk.
Exactly.
And there's a site called Quirky, if any of you have been on it, where you can pre-order things that don't exist yet and support entrepreneurs in that way. You don't have ownership stock, but you get the items. And I would have to take down my background to show you, but literally at my desk are 3 of those really useful items from the past couple of years. Deb, I'm going to go back to you to just talk about Bebo a little bit. You launched mostly at CES many years ago, again, when we could actually go to sessions like that. I guess you could go to CES again this year. And it was because you had protected intellectual property that you could do it. Can you talk for a minute about that?
Yeah, so if you have a unique idea, or you think you have a unique idea, I always recommend to any of the entrepreneurs I work with that we do a search for IP, because there's 2 things. One, you want to protect yourself if it is truly unique. But secondly, if it's not, and the idea is out there and someone owns patents on it, you don't want to spend 6 months of your life and invest a lot of money in a product. It could be mechanical or chemical. There's all different ways to protect your science, your ideas, or process or software. I mean, it goes on and on. But I always recommend that they do a search. You can get usually a lawyer that has expertise in startups and so forth, that it's not very expensive for them to do that. But that's always my recommendation. And once you have IP protection, even if it's provisional, it does help you in terms of value, because it establishes to potential investors, whether it's friends and family or an angel investor, that you are savvy, that you are protected, and that if you do build value over time and your sales start to come in, that someone else can't come in and bigger company, for instance, and kind of sideswipe you and take your idea and run with it.
And that's another place I would say do invest. And if any of you need entrepreneur-friendly attorneys, we can certainly help with that. But I would say spend a little money on the search and spend a little money on protecting your idea. Both of those will pay back. Deb, any other potholes that were on your list that you want us to make sure we talk about? I'm looking at the clock and we only have 10 minutes left.
Yeah, I think be fearless. So a lot of women and even male entrepreneurs I worked with, they're hesitant. And I think that sometimes the hesitation, it slows you down. Lean into your idea, make as much progress as quickly as possible, especially if you have a unique idea, because it's kind of weird how the world works. But these new ideas all seem to come out of different pockets at the same time. So within several months, the idea that I got a patent, I actually found out that someone had filed for patent protection on my idea a few weeks after me. So there is I think a timing to lean in and to make it happen, because typically those ideas are on trend or there's a time. So that's my big thing. I think fear stops you, and knowing that there's other people out there, find people who lift you up, make sure you have the right support system, whether it's your spouse, a best friend, a group of people that are there for you to bounce ideas off and kind of take that fear away. Just don't be in it all alone. Find those right people to surround yourself with.
Deb, one of the things that that Camille says, Elaine says, I say, you say, you need to surround yourself with the right team. Networking is so important. And last night, literally, I was fortunate enough to be on a networking call with the Women's Empowerment Organization in Women in Healthcare. And these were very senior women talking about how sometimes it's hard to reach out to people to support you, to be in your network. Tips on how to do that, and I'm going to ask everybody. It's a hard thing. It's not just a hard thing for women, it's a hard thing for everyone. But in order to surround yourself with quality people, you have to reach out. If you want to raise money, you have to reach out. So does anybody have a story they want to share about how to get this done?
I would just start by saying there's a lot of organizations. Join organizations. Find peers, find a community, find people who are doing what you want to do. I also know that successful people love to give back. So you can reach out to people online. I mean, on LinkedIn, who've achieved what you want to achieve, or go to places where you're going to meet those kind of mentors or people who've already been in your shoes and had a lot of success. Those relationships are really important. And I know from the women in our community, they love to help. And I think everybody loves to help. You want to help someone who's up and coming. So I just think getting out there is huge. You're not going to have that same kind of experience if you're sitting behind your computer. Really get on the, whether it's Zoom calls or networking event or in-person programs, and join groups, whether it's industry groups, whether it's other groups of entrepreneurs, obviously organizations like WPO, where it's a lot of women entrepreneurs, where you're going to find a lot of different expertise and input so that you can find those people, so that you have that community when you're ready and you've got an idea or you want to jump, that you've got people around you who can help support you and answer questions and give you advice, because we all need that. And I get to know people now before you want to, before you need them.
Great point. Organizations, and don't wait till you need something to reach out to somebody you admire. And also think about what you can offer them. It's never really just a one-way street. I love teaching. So if you reach out to me and you need something from me, but I feel like I can give something back to you, I'm a happy camper. So, and by the way, we're all resources you now know. So, we'll put our LinkedIn's in the follow-up email, and we'll be here if you need us. Anybody else want to jump in on that? Networking, the power of surrounding yourself with quality people. Elaine, I saw you unmuted.
Oh, sure. Yeah, just to piggyback on that point, what I found is the people that are most successful with this give without any expectation of getting anything back. It just creates good karma around them. They help people who may never be in a position to help them, and they don't keep score. Sometimes people are a little transactional about networking, and that's where I think it backfires. I also think listening is really important too. When you're on any business call, really listen to not just what the business call is about, but that person. What are their goals? Do they seem unhappy in their job maybe? And you could write to them on LinkedIn and say, hey, not sure if this would interest you or anyone you know, but I found out about an opening somewhere else. Things like that, where you really are tapping into what their goals are. Then you'd be surprised at how the resources that you need come to you when you're in a position to be asking or just putting out an intention into the business world and hoping that the resources come to you.
I think that's a great point. And in this group that I was in last night, there was a quote which I want to steal. For Deb and I are actually going to speak at Lehigh University for women entrepreneurs that are getting their degrees. And the quote was something like, networking isn't about greed, it's about generosity. And I thought that was very true. And in the days of COVID, we think differently about what our lives mean, and generosity becomes an even more important, I think, part of the ethos of who we are. Anybody else want to add to that? Vanessa, maybe you could talk a little bit about being a student, being a young entrepreneur. I am no longer a young entrepreneur.
Yeah, sure. So I think especially when you're a student, people are even more willing to help out, I feel. I remember when I was in school, I would search through our alumni database and search for anyone that was doing anything relevant and just ask them if I could have 10 minutes of their time. And maybe afterwards, I'd send them like a Starbucks gift card and just say, thank you so much. I really appreciate that. And before I got on the call with them, I would write out very specific questions for them to really research who they were and what my ask was.
Excellent. By the way, a woman on this networking call who happened to be from Hallmark said, don't underestimate the power of the written note. And of course, use a Hallmark card. But the power of the written note still works for a lot of people. And so sending a Starbucks gift card or writing a hand note when somebody spends a few minutes of you, you will be remembered. So we only have just, oh, go ahead, Deb.
I have one quick question because this comes up. I have probably dozens of entrepreneurs I work with, and they always are asking for funding. There's grants, there's military, there's all these different types of funding. So I don't know if it's, Elaine or Camille, I don't know who would know best, but how do you search? Like, it feels like it's a needle in a haystack, right? Because you have a particular area that you're in, or you have a particular background. So how do you find that needle in a haystack where you fit to apply for the grant, or that they have, women, oops, that's my pup, sorry. How do you find those different opportunities?
It's very funny. I was good to just add to that. First of all, having a network, right? There's so much money out there, and there's a lot of money for women right now. And it could be $10,000, 20, 50. It doesn't have to be a lot of money to really help you get off the ground. And I think having that network, first of all, follow people who share this kind of stuff. There are a lot of organizations and a lot of women that support other women and organizations that support business owners, and they post these kind of things all the time on LinkedIn and on other social media platforms. There's a grant available from Bank of America for XYZ, or other funding available, and there's other organizations that do that kind of thing as well. So if you follow the right people, you're just going to see that kind of stuff come up in your feed, and it'll help you find those opportunities. But again, the more people you know, the more you're also going to hear about opportunities that are available, or people are going to think about you when they hear about something out there, right? They hear about an opportunity, there's a grant that's out there, and you know what, that woman I met, she qualifies for that, let me know. And I do that kind of stuff all the time, where I hear about opportunities and I reach out to individuals that I know will be able to, that might be a great opportunity for them. Recently, C200 did a lot of grants for women of color entrepreneurs that had small businesses. I reached out to individuals I knew. I reached out to women who I know work with a lot of women of color entrepreneurs. So, making those relationships so you're top of mind, I think, is also just really, really helpful.
Thanks. Anybody else? Elaine? Yeah.
There are also some really great newsletters. I like Hello Alice. They come out every week with different grants and opportunities for women. And I'm sure that a lot of the organizations for women do that too. Also, networking outside of your usual circles is a good way to find out about things that maybe your inner circle doesn't know about. So if you're a 55-year-old woman networking with 18 to 25-year-old male entrepreneurs, that'll bring a whole bunch of different opportunities into your orbit that maybe you just wouldn't have heard about through word of mouth. And there's so many organizations or pitch nights and things for entrepreneurs where you can meet people who are a little unlike you and tap into what they know as well.
I'll just put in a PSA for your local university. Most local universities have their own accelerators or incubators backed by funding, and they desperately want to include the community, not just students. So they often fund both. So if you live within an hour of a college or university, I bet they have that resource. And if it's Lehigh, Rutgers, or NYU, you can ping me because I know those resources well. And it is now officially 1 o'clock. So I'm going to say thank you so much to our panelists and to our guests who asked wonderful questions. This is not the last in our entrepreneur series. We have a couple more coming. So watch the Connections newsletter, and they'll be coming out. And as I mentioned, if you want to forward this along with the incremental resources that we'll add, we'll get that out to you all shortly. Thank you again, everybody. Really
Thanks,
appreciate it.
Lisa. Thank
Thanks,
you.
everyone.
Thank you so much.